everyone to the last TEO seminar of the semester. And for this occasion, we have a very special visitor from across the Long Island Sound, Professor Anji Seth from the University of Connecticut at Stores. So Anji Seth did his bachelor's degree at Worcester Polytechnic in Massachusetts, which is a very highly ranked engineering school, and her degree was in mechanical engineering, and for a number of years subsequently she worked at United Technologies as an engineer, and then decided to go back to school and chose atmospheric sciences at University of Michigan at Ann Arbor. But most of her research was done at NCAR under the advisement of Bob Dickinson, and she developed or helped develop vegetation parameterization in one of the earlier land surface models. And subsequent to that, she was a postdoc research associate at the International Research Institute at Columbia University before joining the faculty at University of Connecticut. She received the very prestigious Career Award from NSF, and she is also a reviewer for the IPCC report, which is expected to come out next year, I believe. And so it is a pleasure to welcome her. Please please welcome Anji Seth for today's seminar.
Can you hear me now?
Sure.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation, Dr. Hamid and the group here. This is my first ever trip to Long Island, and it was a pleasure to see it in the rain in all its glory coming across on the ferry this morning. So I'm looking forward to doing it again sometime when it's not raining, but it's beautiful. So I guess I have this so I can walk around. It's nice. What I'm going to talk about today is some work that is not related to my career award. The career grant that I have is to study climate change in the Northeast U.S. But this is work that is near and dear to my heart and has evolved from my earlier analysis of and studies of the South American monsoon. So I'll give you a little rundown of how this has evolved. But what we're looking at is a somewhat subtle change in going beyond the mean changes in rainfall in the monsoons and looking at the transition seasons. So how is the annual cycle expected to change? And are there changes that we can discern in the annual cycle? Oh, I should mention my co-authors, Sarah Rauscher, Ali Giannini, Michela Biasuti, Susana Camargo, and Maisa Rojas. We've all kind of collectively been involved in monsoon work and came together for this analysis. The errors or any problems are mine. Still trying to put together my talk on this subject. The paper has just recently come out. We have, I'll talk with you about an earlier paper from 2011, and then we just have a paper in Journal of Climate that is about to, it's in press. So I thought I'd start with this picture. It's a short editorial piece in Nature Geoscience that just came out in the past week or so. Michela Biasuti wrote a nice summary of an article by Huang et al., where they're talking about this projection using the CMIP5 models, looking at the CMIP5 models, looking at the increase in amplitude of the annual cycle. So in the tropics and in the regions of the ITCZ and the equator, It is expected that the wet season should be wetter and the dry season drier in the future. And so this is a little summary statement. Rainfall disparities are expected to intensify in response to anthropogenic climate change. Suggestions that the wet will get wetter. This is the rich get richer idea that David Neal has put forward several years ago. And so there are a couple of different mechanisms being discussed in Huang et al. One is that there is more humidity in the atmosphere. So atmospheric moisture is a very robust response to greenhouse gas forcing. But the other is that at the equator, you actually have stronger lift that's driving increased rainfall at the equator. The punchline here is, though, that the expectation is that the annual cycle amplitude in the tropics is expected to increase, so you should see wetter, wet, drier, dry seasons. This is background. And then there's another very recent paper that has summarized in the CMIP5 projections. Does everyone know CMIP5? Okay, so the CMIP5 projections, which are have been run for the fifth assessment report. This summary paper has just come out, I think, in JGR or GRL, I don't remember which, where they have looked at the global monsoon, and there's a very specific definition of the monsoon areas by this group. I think the Su et al. Also have a paper on it, and using the same methods. And so precipitation for the global monsoon in the projections is expected to increase. That's here going from 1900 to 2100. So you have rainfall increases projected in the global monsoon region as defined by their particular method. And then they are also showing that there is an increased moisture convergence in those regions, increased evaporation, but at the same time, decreases in wind convergence. So the thermodynamic component, this increase in water vapor, is really what's driving the increase in rainfall projected in the monsoons. And this is it's an overall mean increase in rainfall, primarily due to that increase in water vapor.
I have a question here, but
Yeah.
but this is not your work. But it sort of strikes me that we have been saying that we've been warming for over 100 years now. But in the precipitation curve they have is that it's flat between 1900 to 2000 and then start ramping up, which seems strange to me.
Oh, well, actually, if you look at this paper, they have the another picture similar to this with the observed rainfall in the monsoon regions. And the observations look, there's an increase and then a decrease. And then, so the observations show an increase, but then a significant drop off. And I'm not sure what the explanation for that is. So I agree that it's more complicated than this. This is for a global monsoon region, as defined by Su et al. So they have a special way of defining what regions are monsoon regions. So I can't tell you why. That's what they've done. So let me tell you what I can talk more about, which is my own work. And so in the analysis of the CMIP3, the earlier projections that we did for South America, if you just look at this plot right here, we found that this is the annual cycle of rainfall. So January to December, monthly rainfall And the black lines are the climatology, and this is model climatology. We're in model world. So the rainy season in South America starts in October, November, December, and peaks. So the peak of the rainfall is actually split here, and then this is the dry season, right? So the thin lines are the lesser rainfall, the dry season. And then the colors are the projections of rainfall from the models, the late 21st century minus the late 20th century. So green represents increased rainfall and brown decreased rainfall. And we did do some statistical significance, so that's the dotted areas. So what we found for South America is that we see this very clear drier dry season and some indication of a wetter wet season. But we also found an extension of the drying into the early rainy season in South America. And at the same time, we published this result back in 2010, and at the same time, Michela Biasuti and colleagues published a paper on West Africa that showed a similar result, that there was this, in the CMIP5 projections, there was a suggestion of delay in the rainy season or a drying in the early part of the West African rainy season. And so I decided to look at that again in the data. And so if you look at West Africa, now we're in the northern hemisphere, so the peak of the rainfall is in June, July, August, September for the climatology. And again, you see drier dry season, wetter wet season, but this extension of drying into the early rainy season. So this is what Michela and colleagues showed in their paper. And so this is two different hemispheres in the projections. So I decided to look at the other monsoon regions to see, do we see this kind of drying in the early season in other monsoon regions? And here's the North American region, very clear, a little bit wetter in the late season, drier in the early rainy season. And in South Africa also, this drying extending into the early rainy season and wetter in the late rainy season. So there's some hint that this was more than just a regional phenomenon. There's something larger scale going on. And so we can look at this in different ways. This is now the global tropics. And so the black contours in this picture are the climatological rainfall. So here's the southern hemisphere monsoon, global monsoon. This is averaged over all longitudes. Northern hemisphere rainy season in the summer and the dry seasons. And again, the colors are the future minus present, so you see increased rainfall along the tropical belt and in the late part of the rainy season, right? Late summer increases in rainfall, but the dry seasons extend into the early rainy seasons, and this is for global tropics. If you look at land only, so you do the calculation just for land grid points, you see a similar result, but this drying extends even further and perhaps more intensely into the early rainy season. So there's something global going on, and it seems to be stronger over land. That's what I got out of this. And this is all still from the CMIP5 results. So we're just trying to get the background going here. So from those results, we wanted to try to understand why would this be happening? And so I was working with Ali Giannini, and she has been studying Sahel rainfall, West Africa, for a while. And in some of her work, she's really using this moist static energy framework. So you can, it's nice because you can include both the effects of water vapor and energy together. And so we can define, right, the dry static energy, or the moist static energy is just the dry static energy plus this moisture term. And the dry static energy includes temperature and geopotential, so that should be pretty straightforward. So what we're going to do is look at the, use this moist static energy to create basically a difference between the upper level and lower level moist static energy terms. And the difference, upper minus lower, is going to tell us something about the stability of the troposphere, the tropical troposphere. And then if we look at the future minus present of this vertical difference in moist static energy, it will tell us, is the tropical troposphere more stable in the future or less stable in the future? So that's basically what we're doing here. And then associated with this are these two mechanisms. So what we want to try to understand is, in the case of greenhouse gas forcing of the global climate, what we have is radiative warming of the surface from the greenhouse gases. And that is going to warm the upper troposphere more than the lower troposphere, which is going to tend to stabilize the troposphere. So our remote forcing, our global forcing from greenhouse gases, is what we call the remote forcing, tends to have a warmer upper troposphere and increased stability. That's going to, in general, decrease rainfall and increase moisture divergence at the surface. So, so our large-scale remote mechanism due to greenhouse forcing is going to be to stabilize the tropical troposphere. So that is, we would expect to see more stability in our vertical moist static energy term. The other mechanism is more of a bottom-up. So locally, in a monsoon region, we would expect that when there's enhanced greenhouse radiative forcing, we should have warmer surface temperatures, more evaporation, more energy available for evaporation, decreased stability then at the surface, and because we have more moist static energy, and that will tend to increase rainfall. So these two mechanisms are working against each other, and this one we expect will dominate during the dry season to give us a dry season and increased stability during the dry season. And this one should dominate in the wet season, in the warm season. So during the rainy season. And if we think about that, it corresponds to some extent to the rich get richer. So if we have this dominating in the rainy season, we're going to get increased rainfall. This dominating in the dry season, we'll get decreased rainfall. So if we apply this then and look at our vertical measure of moist static energy, the top panel here now is the same as it's the rainfall that we've had before. It's global. This panel is global annual cycle of rainfall. So January to December, the black lines are the climatology dry seasons, wet seasons, and you have this extension of drying into the early rainy season. And again, the land only has a stronger drying associated with it. The bottom panels now are this vertical measure of moist static energy. And what we see is something that looks similar. So now brown colors here are indicating increased stability in the tropical troposphere. So the black lines, which you probably can barely see here, are now the precipitation changes from this plot. So I have black lines indicating the precipitation changes, and these are the decreases in precipitation, increases in precipitation. The colors are the change in stability. So you have a decrease in stability, an increase in stability, right? Brown is an increase in stability during the dry seasons, and decreases in stability during the rainy seasons. But this increase in stability extends into the early rainy season in both hemispheres. So you see that in the global results. You also see it in the land-only results. But what we see, come back over here, in the land-only results, which you are going to have a really hard time seeing because you can't really see that these lines are dashed lines. So this is the decrease in rainfall is here. If you look, it's this up here. So the decreases in rainfall actually extend a little bit further into the rainy season than the increase in stability. There's a switch from increased stability to decreased stability right here in like October, November. But the decreases in rainfall continue. So even after this vertical measure of moist static energy switches to showing unstable conditions in the future, there is more rainfall. There is still a decrease in rainfall. We wanted to try to understand this. So why, if our measure is accurate, why would there be a decrease in rainfall even after the vertical measure tells us that the troposphere should be less stable? So we look at the components of our moist static energy. So our upper tropospheric moist static energy, which is essentially the dry static energy because there's not much moisture up there. This is how it varies, the change varies across the annual cycle. So the change in the upper tropospheric dry static energy leads to increased stability, and there isn't a whole lot of variation through the annual cycle. It's more stable year-round, and that's what we would expect. The greenhouse forcing is warming the upper tropical troposphere more than at the surface, and so you get this increased stability due to the upper tropospheric temperature change. In the lower troposphere, the moist static energy is now going to show a stronger annual cycle because the lower tropospheric moist static energy has more to do with the moisture term. And so we have this seasonal cycle where the warm season is going to have increased instability or more increases in instability. But we note that near the surface, this is the low level, the low level moist static energy is increasing the instability year round. But the largest increases in instability have a seasonal cycle. And that seasonal cycle is stronger over land. So what does this tell us? Well, it tells us that it's the lower tropospheric moist static energy that's really creating this seasonal cycle. And then if we break down the lower tropospheric moist static energy again into the moisture term and temperature term, I'll do that now. We can look at So now we have, the top is the moisture term, and this is global land only. And the bottom is the temperature term, global and land only. And in all of these, the black lines are the precipitation change. What we see is that the moisture term, let's look at land, the moisture term is increasing after the, right about when the transition occurs. But the dry, the temperature term continues to be large. So let me see, how do I want to say this? So the decrease in stability peaks in the late summer when the low level moisture increases. So the rainfall can't increase until the moisture term picks up. So in the early rainy season, even though you have an increase in low-level moist static energy, a good portion of that increase is coming from temperature, not from moisture. And until the moisture increases enough to really, you can have instability in the column, but if you don't have moisture there, it's not going to rain if you don't have enough moisture there. So that's the trick here, is you have this decrease in stability, but you don't have enough moisture at the end of this drier dry season to initiate rainfall until that moisture comes in from somewhere else. Did I lose you in that? Okay. So here's a kind of mechanistic way to look at this. In the top here, we'll think about the dry season first. So during the dry season, we have an increase in dry static energy in the upper troposphere. So this is vertical. We're talking about a larger increase in energy in the upper troposphere because of that enhanced warming, and a smaller increase in low-level moist static energy. So you end up with a more stable troposphere, right? The lapse rate is a little bit smaller, and so you have more stability and increased subsidence from the sinking branch of the Hadley cell. So you end up with drier conditions during the dry season in the future. In the wet season, so we'll jump down here, now you have substantial increases in lower tropospheric moist static energy that can outcompensate the upper troposphere. So you have enough low-level moisture to initiate that rainfall and have strong convection during the rainy season. So this is the enhanced water vapor in the atmosphere that is driving this increase in rainfall. But going through the transition from the dry season to the rainy season, we have to overcome this increased stability, and it's going to require moisture coming in from elsewhere in order to do it, because we have a longer or a more intense dry season. There's less moisture available locally. So there is not enough moisture available locally to get things going, and until we can get advection in from elsewhere, it's not going to rain. So that's the description that we're trying to think about. Okay, so that was all the lead up to, so we're looking now at the new suite of experiments, and we want to try to understand first of all, do we see this in the new suite of experiments? And second, can we say anything more about how it's working in the CMIP5 models? So this is kind of a punchline slide, and it's from the new paper that is just coming out in the Journal of Climate. And so this is precipitation change in the northern hemisphere early summer and southern hemisphere early summer, so June and November. I've split it and just put June and November in here. And so what we see is in this initial main plot is that we have drier conditions in these 4 monsoon regions. And so the monsoon regions we're working with are much more simplistic than the regions defined by Su et al. And Akito in their definition of monsoon. So we're looking more at specific regions of interest. So our North American monsoon extends into the Southwest U.S. because we're interested in that. Our South American monsoon region doesn't, in the definition of the global monsoon, the South American monsoon region includes like all of South America, tropical South America. But we're really interested in the region that has a clear dry season here, which is more in the southeast. South Africa and West Africa. So these 4 regions show a very clear drying in the spring. In the Asian monsoons in CMIP5, they don't show this at all. And Australia has kind of a mixed signal. But I've also shown here the annual cycle changes, and for each month, all the different models. So there are multiple bars for 1 bar per model for each month. And you can get a quick sense of, if we look at South America, the dry season here, this is hard to read. The dry season is a bit drier, but the early rainy season is quite dry here. The early rainy season is quite dry in Southern Africa. And then I'm not going to be able to reach up there, so let me use this, pointing it to my finger. Okay, so here's the early rainy season in North America, the early rainy season in West Africa. So these 4 regions are very clearly showing this dry signal in the early rainy season. And then once the rains get going, then there's discrepancy among the models. In fact, probably more discrepancy during the rainy season about whether the models will be wetter or drier. But during the early rainy season, there's actually quite a lot of agreement that the models are suggesting drier conditions. So CMIP5 then is similar to CMIP3, certainly for these 4 regions. There's some other processes going on in Asia that we're going to need to try to understand better. And we will.
So just a quick question here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you about that. So with Asian monsoon, the symmetry shows the same signal, or is it?
Actually, in the Asian monsoon, let me see if I can go back. Do I have? I didn't show it, did I?
You didn't show that.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's in the paper, and so in CMIP3, Southeast Asia showed an early season drying, but India did not. So that's what I can tell you about CMIP3. In CMIP5, neither of them really do. And so there may be some aerosol things going on. The new models have what I find incomprehensible about aerosols. There are so many complicated factors there that I'm still trying to understand. So there are a number of things that could be causing that. And if you have suggestions, please let me know. So here's the regional. I'm going to show you a lot of these Hofmahler plots, so you'll get good at looking at them by the time I'm done. So these are all January to December. The thicker black line is the main rainy season. So this is South Asia. This is the Indian monsoon. And so the models, it's the multi-model mean that I'm showing here for the climatology. And then the difference, again, is the color. So you see much wetter rainy season in the future, projections from CMIP5. And there's some drying during the dry season, but not much extension into the early rainy season in India. Nor in Southeast Asia, there's a little bit here, but it's not very substantial. Whereas in North America, you have drying through much of the year and really just a small time period where it might be wetter. And I've masked here for land only. So all of these have been masked for land only. So there's no land south of 20 degrees north in my North America region. So North America shows this early season drying. South America shows it very clearly here. West Africa also, and South America. So the regions bordering the Atlantic, the Americas and the African monsoons, show this very distinctly. And so that is what we see in CMIP5. And this is from the high emission scenario, so the stronger greenhouse gas forcing. If we look at the divergence, so this is moisture divergence, and it's again the annual cycle for each region. So if we start up here, here's North America, and we want to compare the moisture divergence to the rainfall. So what we've got is increased divergence. So brown is increased moisture divergence, blue is decreased moisture divergence, or you could call it convergence of moisture. So you definitely see more divergence where you see more drying in North America. In South America, increased divergence in the early rainy season, West Africa and South Africa. And as expected, less so in the early rainy seasons in Southeast Asia and Asia. And much more convergence during the moisture convergence during the rainy seasons in the Asian monsoons. So, so this makes sense. It's telling us that indeed there is not the convergence of moisture that is needed in the early rainy season to initiate rainfall after that dry season. And we also looked at evaporation and near surface relative humidity. So, and we want to compare back, right? So in North America, we have very strong decreases in evaporation through much of the winter and early spring. In South America and Southern Africa, the decrease in evaporation occurs primarily in spring at the end of the rainy season when the heating is stronger in what would normally be the early rainy season. Evaporation should be increasing here, but there isn't sufficient surface moisture to do that. So you see these strong decreases in spring in the early rainy season. And whereas in South and Southeast Asia, there is enough rainfall in the rainy season and even in winter to not reduce the evaporation rates very much. So evaporation is not a limitation in these Asian monsoons where the rainfall is ample. Relative humidity also shows the very strong drying in springtime in these 4 monsoons. Africa, perhaps a little bit less so in Africa than in South America and North America. So we're seeing a distinct difference between the monsoon regions in the Americas and Africa compared with the Asian monsoons. Evaporation is ample. Actually, if I come back, we'll come back to the mechanism in a minute. So we can look, I've shown you a lot of those Hofmahler plots. We can look at these in map form again, just to get our bearings. And so these are all for the early rainy season in both hemispheres, so June and November. And this was the precipitation I showed you, I think, before, where you have drying in the early rainy season in these 4 monsoons and less so in the Asian monsoons. The second plot here, this is divergence, moisture divergence. And we see that in the monsoon regions in the Americas and Africa are showing increased moisture divergence in the spring and increased convergence, if anything, in the Asian monsoons. And then evaporation rates are also showing decreases in spring in these 4 monsoons, right? So that's just visually to see that a little bit better. So what do I have here? Northern monsoons, you have reduced evaporation and increased. Southern monsoons, you have reduced evaporation and increased divergence. In the northern monsoons, you have reduced evaporation or increased divergence. Okay, so actually in North America, there's a mix there where you have a different signal in divergence, or less change in divergence, but more change in evaporation. So there are definitely differences between the regions that are of importance, but there is an overall theme between these western, or you could say the monsoons neighboring the Atlantic and those in Asia. And then this is just showing the late season that indeed all these regions, all of them, are showing increases in rainfall. And that's consistent with the results of Husu and Akito that have been looking at the global monsoon in CMIP5 and showing that rainfall is expected to increase globally in monsoons. So the rainy season, once it gets going, definitely has more rainfall and shows increases in moisture convergence as well as increases in evaporation. So then if we come back to our mechanism again, we started talking about this from the CMIP3 results, but this appears to be working to a large extent for the American and African monsoons. That there is in the transition season, the dry season is drier, in all the monsoons. The wet season is wetter in all the monsoons. In the transition seasons in the American and African monsoons appear to be delaying the rainfall because there's not enough moisture in the early season. Because you have this inhibitor, the remote mechanism is still at work because there's not enough low-level moisture to break free of it. And that's what I have. So I guess I could let you read that and then take questions. Happy to answer some.
Any questions? So Kamasi?
Yes. Your prediction is right. So if you go back to 3 slides back, and looking at there.
Oh,
Yes,
this-
well, whichever one of those
This
is
is
fine.
the early summer.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and this one and the next one are almost the same. Looking at the Atlantic Ocean, what I noticed is like the moisture convergence is decreasing. Can you explain?
This,
Yeah.
so this is increased divergence
Yes.
over the Atlantic. Well, so this is this is June, and yeah, well, this entire region is expected to become drier in the projections. I think you have increased subsidence from the
What's with the subtropical high is expanding. So we know that in this region, it is expected because the Adelaide circulation is expanding. The subtropical highs are expanding and shifting northward.
So there's more substance
So
around.
that is an indication of.
But this is pretty far equatorward, so, but it's June. So, yeah, I mean, the high should be intensifying, but I would expect it to be more up there also. I would have to look at the low-level winds also, just to show that more clearly. But these are these are the regions of the high, right? So,
Greg, do you have a question?
Yes, very interesting. I have commented probably about the Indian monsoon change. For the Indian monsoon, particularly in the summer, is strongly modulated by the interseasonal oscillation or interseasonal variability. At the same time, the interannual variability, for example, rainfall, has a strong oscillation of the monsoon precipitation. So I would understand that your results based on CMIP3 or CMIP5 models, those models are usually do not produce a reasonable interseasonal oscillation as well as the rainfall. So if we want to pretty much rely on the projection for future change, is it necessary to simulate those 2 strong modulators well so that we can say?
I wish I had Kevin Trenberth here.
Okay.
Because I would say yes, it would definitely give us more confidence in the results if the interseasonal oscillation and so were better simulated in the models.
Right.
Absolutely. But the monsoon circulation is a global overturning circulation that is to some extent captured by the models. And so while the details of it are not good, especially higher frequency details, the overall overturning circulation and changes in it due to anthropogenic forcing, there should be some confidence in that.
Sure. Right. Okay.
Is that good?
Yeah. Right.
Will you buy it?
Yes.
Okay.
So the projection is not about the interannual variability, it is about the change produced by this major shift in the thermodynamics
Yeah.
of the group.
So there are aspects of the large scale global
Circulation.
monsoon that the models are capturing and can capture, and that's what we're trying to focus on here. Certainly, if you want to get into, regional details and high frequency and the things that are actually going to matter for adaptation, then you're going to need to do those intraseasonal things better. Certainly.
Right.
So.
Can you show the next slide?
The late season?
Because it seems to me, looking at those two slides, looking at over the ocean region, the West Pacific is definitely outlier because it's much bluer in terms of moisture divergence. It's actually much stronger. When the other oceans that we have increasing divergence, West Pacific seems to have decreased in divergence or increasing convergence. So that seems to behave very differently from the other oceans, especially in early summer. If you go back to early summer,
So late summer you have increased convergence
and even early summer, and when all the other oceans actually have increased divergence. So it seems to be operating in another regime, which is
right. So
Yeah,
so there is,
exactly.
when you get to the question of what is the larger scale forcing of these changes, I'm sure that there's going to be an oceanic role in it. What I've been focusing on is more when you start looking at the regions, is there a potential for some local processes? So there's the remote forcing is going to be due to greenhouse gases, but there's an SST role in that as well, especially for the delay, the overall delay in the global signal may well be because of something that's going on here. And are you suggesting, though, that this is more related to what's going on in Asia?
No, I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just seeing the big difference
That it's pretty different.
between the behavior of West Pacific
Yeah.
compared to other oceanic regions. Because most of the tropical region are under subsidence and is supposed to be getting drier.
Right.
But West Pacific seems to be the only place
Is getting
that stands out.
better
That's not behaving
in spring.
the same way.
Yeah. Okay, so that's something else to look into, for sure.
Yes, go on.
So, what makes the moisture divergence different in the early summer and the later season?
So in the early season, well, in the transition, right, you have to go from the dry season, the dynamics of the dry season, which is the large-scale subsidence, to the shifts in circulation in the monsoons that are going to then change the direction of winds to bring moisture into the region, right? That's what happens in most of the monsoon regions, is you have a shift in the winds from offshore to onshore and to bring the moisture in. And so in the early rainy season, the large-scale subsidence is dominating, and the transition to bring moisture in isn't happening as fast, or you need more of it. You need more moisture before you can build up enough to initiate the rainfall. I'm kind of hand waving you there. What I would like to show is along with the divergence is the moisture transport, because that would help illustrate it. So the actual direction of the winds and the transport that's happening here.
So are the wind divergence or convergence consistent with this moisture divergence too?
Well, in the first picture I showed you by Akito, he actually showed that the wind divergence was not consistent, right? So you actually have a divergence of winds overall, while you have a convergence of moisture. So in the early rainy season, so that's what we really need to show is what are the winds doing in the early rainy season, and are they not transporting enough
Also, this should
moisture
be
in?
bifurcated because in the early rainy season, the flow is onshore. So,
Yeah.
and so I think it will become clear. So this is just an average.
This is an
of all
average.
winds.
Right.
So-
This is not for the early
Yeah,
rainy
so-
season, it's for the entire.
So like in the Indian Ocean, in June, July, we have onshore winds, and then in the winter we have offshore winds.
Right.
So the behavior of convergence may be different, or it's probably different in these two seasons.
But if you, this is the change in wind convergence during the rainy season.
I see.
There's less wind convergence during the rainy season. A slowdown of the circulation. The circulation is slowing down.
Okay, very good. So there are no more questions. So let us thank our speaker.